the throne we build. I remember the moment I realized we had built a throne, not for God, but for a man. It didn't start that way. It never does. It begins with admiration, innocent, even pure. A sermon that cuts through the noise. A voice that seems to carry something heavier than words. We say God is using him. And maybe he is. But slowly, we start listening to the man more than we listen for God. We start quoting the preacher more than the scriptures. We don't notice how the center quietly shifts until one day we realize that we're no longer gathering to encounter the holy. We're gathering to witness a performance. And in the glow of the lights, we crown someone. He never asks for it outright, but we offer it freely, because it feels easier to follow a face than to walk by faith. Easier to trust a voice we can see than one we cannot. And so we build him a throne. Not one of gold, but of loyalty, of affirmation, of applause. And when he takes his seat, we call it ministry. But something begins to rot beneath the stage, because no man was made to carry worship. And no soul remains untouched when glory is misplaced. This isn't about one pastor. It never was. It's about what happens when the church forgets who her king really is. When we decorate a pulpit like a palace and forget that it was always meant to be a cross. We say we want revival. But too often, what we actually want is a celebrity who makes Jesus easier to consume. And so we trade reverence for relevance, depth for charisma, holiness for a good show. And then we're surprised when the throne we built becomes a prison for him and for us. We gave him something sacred. And when it collapsed, we asked why God allowed it. But maybe the better question is this: why did we ever think it could stand? What's the one red flag you've personally witnessed in a church that still troubles you today? The rise of the golden voice. He didn't look like a prophet. He looked like a headline. Well-fitted jackets, fire in his tone, a grin that said he knew he owned the room. But when he spoke, something in the air shifted. The words didn't just land, they lived. Carried by rhythm, timing, the subtle art of making the sacred sound cinematic. And we loved it. We called it anointing. We called it power. And maybe for a time it was. But the more we listened, the less we tested the voice. The voice became enough. His name lit up marquees in cities that barely prayed. Hollywood stars sat front row, hungry for something holy, or maybe just hungry for something honest. And when he spoke, even they nodded. A golden voice. That's what it became. Golden because it opened doors no sermon ever had. Golden because it drew in the people we'd given up on. Golden because it was smooth, persuasive, and unforgettable. We mistook volume for weight, emotion for conviction, presence for fruit. And slowly, the message began to orbit around the man. Not in doctrine, he still said all the right things. But in delivery, in posture, in the way everything began and ended with his presence. People flew in not to worship God, but to experience the room he created. And we made excuses. We said, if people are being reached, why question the method? But somewhere deep down, we knew. We knew what it meant when someone could silence a crowd with a look. When sermons were tailored for cameras. When vulnerability started to feel manufactured. We knew what it meant when humility disappeared under applause. He became the message. Not Christ crucified. Not resurrection power. Just him. A brand. A movement. A man whose voice echoed louder than the stillness where God used to meet us. And no one asked how a pulpit turned into a pedestal. Because we were too busy clapping. When applause replaces awe, I remember watching a pastor introduce another. Not with prayer. Not with quiet reverence for the word. But with fireworks in his voice. Like he was welcoming a headliner at a festival. The crowd rose before a single word was spoken. Phones in the air. Cheers so loud, it shook the stage. And something inside me sank. Not because excellence is wrong. Not because celebration is sin. But because the center had shifted again. Not upward, just inward, just louder. When applause replaces awe, what we lose first is silence. And silence is where God has always spoken most clearly. We dress it up with lights, with carefully placed phrases. We build an atmosphere where people feel good, inspired, even convicted. But we leave untouched the trembling that comes when a soul stands before a holy God. Because trembling isn't marketable. It doesn't sell out theaters or build Instagram reels. It doesn't feed the platform. But without it, we forget who we are. Dust. Breathed on by grace. Instead, we start to believe we are owed the stage. That charisma is the same as calling. That applause means heaven approves. And when that happens, the church becomes just another audience. Not a people in awe. Not a bride awaiting her king. Just a room full of faces drawn by lights and kept by style. We stop being worshipers. We become fans. And the danger isn't just in what we've made of our leaders. The danger is what it makes of us. A people numb to the sacred. A people who cheer for men and forget to kneel before God. And when awe dies, glory goes with it. A shadow at the center. First, you don't see it, because the lights are too bright, the crowd too loud, the music too perfect. You assume everything at the center must be light. Why would there be darkness in a place so full of praise? But eventually, something flickers. A crack in the smile, a pause in the rhythm, a whisper that doesn't come from the pulpit, but from behind it. The voice that once stirred your soul now leaves you unsettled, and you can't explain why. There's a difference between sin and shadow. Sin you can name. Shadow is subtler. It's what forms when someone stands where only God should. It's the darkness cast by pride dressed as purpose. And the longer that shadow stays at the center, the more it spreads. It touches everything. Relationships, integrity, the quiet parts of the heart where motives live. Can't be fixed with better sermons. It won't be healed by damage control. Because the issue isn't what was said. It's what wasn't surrendered. Somewhere along the way, God stopped being enough. Not in doctrine, not in statement of faith, but in hunger. In priority. In awe. A man once broken before the throne now builds his own. And in the effort to hold it all together, he begins to fracture. But we don't see it. Because the stage is still crowded. The followers still increasing. The soundbites still going viral. And so we keep feeding the shadow. We keep nodding at charisma and excusing the control. We tell ourselves it's just the pressure of leadership, that everyone stumbles, that no one's perfect, until it all collapses. And when it does, we act surprised. But the shadow had been there all along. We just didn't want to look directly at it. Because deep down, we didn't want the truth. We wanted the version of him that made us feel safe. Strong, inspired, certain, and maybe, just maybe, he did too. But no one stands at the center forever without consequence. Not even the man who once pointed us to Jesus. The cost of being crowned. There is a weight to being lifted up. We think of crowns as rewards, symbols of calling, proof that God's hand is on someone. But crowns can crush, especially when they're forged by human hands. Especially when we place them on heads that were never meant to wear them. The crown doesn't ask if you're ready. It simply sits there, heavy and waiting. And for a while, you carry it well. You adjust. You convince yourself that it fits. You tell yourself it's what God always wanted. The crowds cheer louder. The platform grows wider. The world opens its doors. But in secret, your soul begins to close. Because every crown comes with a contract. It says, stay inspiring. Stay strong. Don't bleed in public. Don't question too loudly. Don't be human. So you learn how to preach through exhaustion. How to smile through fracture. How to pose while your heart forgets how to kneel. And in the end, you become a monument. Impressive, admired, untouchable. But monuments don't move. They don't grow. They don't repent. They just stand there, slowly eroding under the weight of what they were built to represent. That's the cost of being crowned. You gain the world's approval but lose the space to be weak. You forget how to weep at the altar. You forget the voice that first called you. And perhaps worst of all, you start believing that the applause is the same as God's presence. But it's not, because God doesn't meet us at the height of our platform. He meets us in the dirt, in the surrender, in the breaking. The cost of being crowned by people is that you begin to fear disappointing them more than you fear grieving the Spirit. And when that happens, ministry becomes performance. And performance will always ask for more than you can give. Until one day, the crown slips, and you realize it was never yours to wear. Borrowed fire always burns. There's a kind of fire that doesn't come from God. It looks the same at first, bright, consuming, even powerful. But it doesn't purify. It doesn't refine. It performs. And it burns everything it touches. When we stop seeking the presence of God and start chasing the energy of a crowd, we light matches from someone else's flame. We preach borrowed convictions. We echo borrowed prayers. We hold up borrowed righteousness as if it were our own. And for a time, it works. The services stay full. The clips go viral. The atmosphere feels electric. But borrowed fire never sustains. It devours. The danger isn't just in leading with it, it's in thinking it's real. Because the longer we carry borrowed fire, the more we lose our hunger for the real. We forget what it's like to tremble in the presence of God without an audience watching. We forget what it's like to wait in the quiet for a word we can't manufacture. And eventually, the fire we borrowed turns on us. It exposes what we tried to hide. It consumes what we tried to build. Not out of cruelty, but because God is not mocked. His glory is not a backdrop. It's not a tool to amplify our voice. It's not a platform to display our gifts. It is holy, untouchable. And when we try to carry it without fear, we are always burned. Because borrowed fire may look impressive, but it cannot sanctify, it cannot save, and it cannot last. The forgotten name. Somewhere in the noise, we forgot the name. Not entirely. We still spoke it. We still sang it. We still etched it into the backdrop of our stages, subtle and clean. But it wasn't central anymore. Not really. Because when another name draws the crowd, sets the tone, anchors the message, Christ becomes an accessory to the brand, not the foundation of it. We didn't mean to replace him. But slowly a new gravity formed in the room. Sermons bent toward personality. Worship pointed toward performance. Testimonies sounded like endorsements. And his name, though sacred, was no longer the loudest. We said Jesus like punctuation, not as a person. We referenced him, quoted him, nodded in his direction. But the weight, the trembling, the ache for his presence, that started to fade. Because there wasn't room for two names at the center. And we'd already crowned ours. The danger of forgetting his name isn't that we stop talking about him. It's that we stop depending on him. We start leaning on influence instead of intercession. On creativity instead of communion. On momentum instead of mercy. And in doing so, we build something that looks holy, sounds powerful, and feels spiritual, but underneath it's hollow. Because no other name carries life. No voice redeems. No brand resurrects. No platform saves. Only Jesus, the one we once followed, the one we once adored, the one who still waits for us to lay down our names and remember his. What John remembered. John had crowds too. He had followers who walked miles to hear him. He had influence, reputation, a voice people trusted. And when Jesus arrived, they tried to stir rivalry. Rabbi, they said, everyone is going to him now. But John didn't panic. He remembered something we often forget. This joy of mine is now complete. He must increase, but I must decrease. It wasn't defeat. It was clarity. John knew who he wasn't, and that was his strength. He wasn't the light, only a witness to it. He wasn't the Christ, only the one sent ahead. He wasn't the message, only the voice. And he rejoiced in the fading. In a world obsessed with staying relevant, staying central, staying praised, John stepped aside. Not because he lacked calling, but because he understood it. He remembered the purpose. To prepare the way, not to become the destination. He chose obscurity so that glory could take center stage. He was never crowned, never celebrated, never preserved in stained glass. He simply pointed. And in doing so, he showed us the way back when we've forgotten who the story is about. The one we forgot to see. He was there the whole time. Not on the stage, not in the spotlight, not behind the microphone, but in the still corners of the sanctuary. In the quiet moments when no one was watching. In the hunger we couldn't name. In the ache we carried home. Jesus. The one we came for even when we didn't know it. The one whose presence used to make us fall to our knees, now quietly waiting for our attention beneath the noise we mistook for glory. We saw the preacher. We saw the branding. We saw the metrics. But we forgot to see him. Not because he left, but because we looked away. We chased reflections instead of the source. We built ministries that reached wide but forgot to reach deep. And yet he stayed, patient, untouched by our disordered praise, still extending mercy to a church that lost her compass. Still calling out not through spectacle, but through love. He never needed a platform. He climbed a cross, not to be famous, but to set us free. And when the lights dim, when the noise fades, when the crown falls, he will still be there. Not angry, not distant, just waiting to be seen again. A quiet return. It doesn't take a scandal to come home. It only takes honesty. A moment alone, not with a sermon, not with a song, but with the one who never needed a spotlight to speak. You don't have to explain the detour. He already knows. And still, he invites. No stage, no title, just grace. The return isn't loud. It won't trend. But it's real. And it's where revival begins, not in crowds, but in hearts quietly bowing again to the name that was never meant to share the throne. So lay down the crown, turn down the volume, come back to the stillness where it all began. Just Jesus. If this touched your heart, help share this. Like, comment, subscribe, not for numbers, but so this message reaches someone else who needs it.